This story begins with B rushing to a cafe. In a hurry, she asked the waiter for permission to use the restroom. Unfortunately, the waiter refused her request, explaining that the toilet was only for paying customers. B, who was in a desperate situation, tried offering to buy something after using the restroom, but the waiter insisted that she had to pay first. B glanced around and saw a long line of customers waiting to order. The situation made it nearly impossible for her to pay quickly. Just as B started to feel hopeless, a man named Ben suddenly appeared. Quickly, Ben pretended to be her husband and claimed that B had already bought something. Ben's quick thinking convinced the waiter to let B use the restroom. Feeling relieved, B headed straight to the restroom. There, she called a friend to share the unexpected kindness of a stranger. However, her relief didn't last long. As B was washing her hands, water from the sink spilled and soaked her pants. In a panic, B tried to dry her pants using the hand dryer in the restroom. The process took longer than she had hoped, and as B was still frantically trying to finish, there was a sudden knock on the door. Ben's voice came from outside, gently asking if everything was okay. B, feeling embarrassed, quickly assured him that she was fine. Her heart pounded as she tried to make herself look more presentable. Finally, B emerged from the restroom with her pants mostly dry. Ben was still waiting outside the restroom, holding B's jacket that she had left behind. B awkwardly thanked him, accepting her jacket with a nervous smile and mumbling a quick goodbye. As B walked toward the exit, Ben noticed a piece of paper towel stuck to her shoe. He tried to tell her, but B misunderstood. She thought Ben was about to confess something or even ask her out. Without thinking, B boldly suggested that they spend more time together. Ben, surprised but also amused by B's confidence, finally agreed. They decided to continue their day together. They strolled through the city streets, talking and laughing, forming a deeper connection throughout the day. Their relationship grew closer one night at Ben's apartment. There, they shared stories about their lives. B, who was once a gymnast and is now studying law, talked about her uncertainty regarding her career. She wondered if becoming a lawyer was truly the right path for her. Meanwhile, Ben, who works as a trader, shared the story about the wrench on his shelf. The wrench was a gift from his late mother, who always believed that anything broken could be fixed. Even though they grew closer, that night ended innocently. The next morning, B woke up first and felt confused about how to handle the situation. In the end, she decided to leave without waking Ben. On her way home, B called her friend and talked about how wonderful the time she spent with Ben was. However, when B admitted she left without saying goodbye, her friend gently scolded her. Her friend reminded her that it wasn't fair to just leave without a proper farewell. She urged B to go back and say goodbye properly. Following her friend's advice, B returned to Ben's apartment. Coincidentally, at the same time, Pete, Ben's best friend, also arrived at Ben's place. Ben, feeling hurt and disappointed, told Pete about the girl who had spent the night with him. As B approached Ben's apartment, she overheard Ben talking to Pete. He called her awkward and a disaster, even saying he was relieved that she was gone. Hearing that, B felt confused. What had gone wrong? She didn't realize that Ben was actually hiding his true feelings behind his harsh words. B felt hurt and embarrassed. Silently, she turned around and left, her heart broken, thinking Ben saw their time together in a completely different way. 6 months later, Ben and Pete were invited by Claudia and Hallie to a nightclub. Claudia and Hallie, who were preparing to get married, wanted to celebrate and share their happy news with Pete, Claudia's brother, and his friend Ben. Unbeknownst to Ben, B was actually close friends with Claudia and Hallie, and she was also invited to the party. When B and Ben's eyes met, their expressions immediately changed. They exchanged a few tense words, and Claudia and Hallie quickly picked up on the tension. They realized that Ben and B had known each other before. Sensing the awkward atmosphere, Claudia, Hallie, and Pete chose to step away, leaving Ben and B in their uncomfortable moment. B tried to steer the conversation casually, saying that she was engaged. That statement made Ben look surprised. However, with Claudia and Hallie's wedding in Australia approaching, Ben and B couldn't avoid their unresolved issues. Ben eventually boarded a plane to Australia to attend Claudia and Hallie's wedding. Coincidentally, B was on the same flight. When Ben noticed her presence, he teased her about not bringing her fiancé. B finally admitted that she had lied about her engagement. A little while after the plane took off, B needed to use the restroom. She walked toward the first-class cabin, where she saw the bathroom. Just as she approached, another passenger went inside, forcing her to wait. While waiting, B noticed Ben's seat with a cake on his tray table. Feeling a bit mischievous, B decided to steal the cake. However, in the process, her clothes got caught on Ben's seat, trapping her and preventing her from moving. After a few awkward attempts, B finally managed to free herself without waking Ben. Upon arriving in Australia, the group gathered at Pete's stepfather's house. The house was a beautiful property overlooking the beach. However, tensions began to rise as Ben and B felt uneasy with the arrangement. They realized that they wouldn't just be sharing the house with other wedding guests, but also with Ben's ex-girlfriend, Margaret. As they took a leisurely walk to the nearby beach with B and the bridal couple, Margaret, Ben's former lover, approached them. Margaret offered Ben a warm and friendly hug, then introduced Beau, her partner. That made Ben feel uneasy for a moment, as his old feelings started to resurface. Later inside the house, B's parents, Leo and Innie, arrived. They started talking about B's ex-fiancé, Jonathan, and expressed their hope that B would get back together with him. B felt frustrated because she had decided to leave the past behind, but her parents' persistence made everything feel awkward. At the same time, Ben found himself staring at an old photo of him and Margaret. He was lost in thought, unsure if he had truly moved on from his past. That night, their group gathered for dinner together. At first, the atmosphere was lively and fun, but suddenly things turned chaotic when Ben and B started arguing while setting off fireworks. Their argument escalated, and accidentally, they lit a firework that hit a nearby flower arrangement. A small fire broke out, and in an instant the situation turned frantic. The fire began to spread and everyone screamed for help. Hallie even shrieked as the flames got close to her hair. In the midst of the chaos, Margaret quickly stepped forward. She immediately took off her top and used it to put out the fire. After the chaos subsided and the atmosphere calmed down, Claudia and Hallie looked very upset about the accident. Quietly, they discussed the firework incident with Pete and Pete's parents, Roger and Miranda. They were determined to avoid further disturbances and came up with a plan to bring Ben and B together. They hoped that by doing so, the tension between the two would ease. The next morning, Ben was seen on the beach, going through his workout routine while enjoying the sunrise. Meanwhile, B was relaxing by the pool. After finishing his exercise, Ben headed to the bathroom. There, Ben accidentally overheard Pete and Roger awkwardly talking about how B secretly liked him and how perfect they would be together. Their conversation sounded forced, as if they were trying too hard to convince Ben. Meanwhile, at the breakfast table, B overheard Claudia and Hallie speaking in the same awkward way about how much Ben liked her. Their behavior made B uncomfortable. As B was trying to process the weirdness, Ben came in and was about to say something. But before Ben could speak, B immediately mentioned how strange Claudia and Hallie's behavior was, as if they were trying to set something up. Ben agreed and added that he had also overheard Pete and Roger talking about the same thing in the bathroom. They both realized that their friends were trying to set them up. Seeing the situation, Ben and B decided to take advantage of it. They agreed to play along with the plan. Then, they went to the beach and swam out to a small boat anchored nearby. They sought privacy and a chance to talk without interruption. On the boat, B, frustrated with her parents' obsession with her ex-fiancé Jonathan, suggested that they pretend to be in a relationship. The goal was to distract her parents from Jonathan. Ben agreed, seeing this as a chance to make Margaret jealous and maybe win her back. As they were talking, B saw her parents appear on the beach. Feeling annoyed, B suddenly leaned toward Ben, acting more affectionate to create a convincing appearance. Ben, a bit surprised, actually enjoyed the moment. But when B started to go overboard, Ben stopped her. They both laughed and eventually jumped into the water to swim back to the beach. The next morning, as everyone was getting ready for a day hike, B introduced Ben to Jonathan. The moment felt awkward as the two men shook hands with an uneasy attitude. Once the group was ready, they began the hike. B deliberately stayed close to Ben, leaving Jonathan behind. After walking quite a while through the forest, the group finally reached a spot with a stunning view. Ben and B decided this was the perfect time to start pretending to be a couple. B leaned in and hugged Ben, assuming the others were watching them. But they failed to realize that most of the group was actually busy watching Pete, who was excitedly talking about a koala he had seen. They had no idea about Ben and B's antics. As B's actions became more exaggerated, she suddenly saw a spider inside Ben's pants. Panicking, Ben immediately took off his clothes, throwing them to the edge of the mountain in a frenzy. B couldn't help but laugh at Ben's hilarious reaction. Meanwhile, the other group members were too busy watching Pete, who was still chatting with the koala. They were completely unaware of the chaos happening between Ben and B. With no other choice, Ben ended up wearing B's tight shorts, which of course looked a little funny and uncomfortable. Back at the house, B's father, Leo, tried to dive into the pool. His clumsy movements caught Ben's attention. Without thinking, Ben immediately jumped into the pool to help Leo. Ben taught Leo the diving techniques he had learned from his mother. B, watching from a distance, felt touched by Ben's kindness. In an instant, B had an idea. She took advantage of this moment to pretend they were a couple in front of her parents. Leo and Innie, seeing their closeness, were impressed and seemed happy. They walked back into the house holding hands as if they were really a couple. But they didn't realize that someone else was secretly watching them closely. That person believed that Ben and Bea were truly in love. Once inside, Bea thanked Ben for his kindness in helping her father. Then Bea told Ben that he might need to rinse off after swimming. Later that same day, Bea played a casual game of chess with Jonathan. Jonathan mentioned that he only came because his parents forced him to, subtly hinting at his hope of getting back together with Bea. But Bea gently brushed him off and treated Jonathan like family. Meanwhile, Ben spent some time with Margaret. Margaret offered Ben a cup of coffee, proudly calling it the best coffee in the world. As they talked, Margaret began to show her jealousy over Ben's closeness with Bea. Margaret made subtle comments about their relationship, which made Ben feel uncomfortable. He quickly excused himself, hurrying to find Bea. Ben told Bea that their plan was working, but admitted that Margaret's growing attention made him uneasy. That night, the group boarded a boat to party. The music grew louder as the night went on, and everyone started dancing on the floor. Ben and Bea joined in, but they realized it wasn't enough to grab everyone's attention. Suddenly, Bea had an idea. She told Ben to follow her to the bow of the boat. Bea suggested they do the famous "I'm flying" scene from the movie Titanic. Ben was hesitant at first, feeling horrified and awkward, but after a little arguing, he finally agreed. At the bow of the boat, they recreated the scene with their arms outstretched and their eyes on the water. Their plan worked. Margaret and the others noticed, everyone smiling and looking happy, as if confirming that Ben and Bea were indeed a couple. But Margaret and Jonathan couldn't hide their jealousy. They watched the pair with sharp stares. As Ben and Bea prepared to step away from the bow, Bea suddenly lost her balance and fell into the water. Without a second thought, Ben immediately jumped in to save her. After a few seconds, Hallie saw Ben and Bea in the water and quickly alerted the others. The group on the boat panicked and shouted for help, but the boat captain couldn't turn around in the shallow waters. They were forced to wait for the Coast Guard to arrive. While waiting, Ben and Bea held onto the float. In those quiet moments, they began to speak honestly with each other. They apologized to one another. Ben admitted that he regretted his words about Bea earlier, and Bea apologized for leaving without saying goodbye. Bea also shared that she had actually left law school without telling her parents. Ben listened attentively, reassuring her as he spoke about the pressure he had been feeling. The tension between them eased, and they started laughing together, reflecting on how far they had come. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, Ben looked nervous as they were transported back to safety. His fear of heights was obvious. Sensing his anxiety, Bea started singing the same song she had heard him sing on the plane. The song managed to calm him, and they continued the journey with lighter hearts. After being rescued, Ben and Bea were taken home by the officers. Ben thanked them and suggested to Bea that they share a cup of coffee together. Back home, they enjoyed a quiet moment as Ben made her a grilled cheese sandwich, just like he did on the first day they met. At that moment, their connection felt so natural, and as they exchanged glances, the feelings they had been holding back could no longer be ignored. The next morning, Ben left the room before sunrise. When Bea woke up and realized he was gone, she felt a little sad. That feeling reminded her of what Ben had felt before, when she had left without saying goodbye. Meanwhile, preparations for Claudia and Hallie's wedding continued. Pete convinced Ben to join him in picking up the flowers. During the trip, Pete jokingly probed Ben about his relationship with Bea. Ben hesitated and admitted that he wasn't sure about their future. Pete playfully smacked him with a bouquet, reminding him not to let someone special slip away. On the other side, Bea and Margaret went to pick up the wedding cake. During their conversation, Bea accidentally revealed that her relationship with Ben wasn't serious. Margaret took the opportunity to express her interest in Ben, and Bea reluctantly gave her blessing. Back at home, tensions rose when Bea's parents found out that she had dropped out of law school. Bea believed that Ben had spilled the secret, and she was immediately furious when Ben showed up with flowers. A heated argument broke out, and in the middle of the chaos, Pete revealed that he was the one who accidentally told Bea's parents, not Ben. The situation got even worse when Pete's dog dragged a toy onto the table where the wedding cake was placed. The cake box toppled over, and the cake fell to the floor, making things even more disastrous. Despite everything, the misunderstanding was finally cleared up. Bea felt embarrassed and frustrated, then stormed out, leaving Ben to process it all. Despite the commotion, the wedding preparations continued. On the wedding day, Ben overheard Claudia and Hallie arguing, blaming the mess on him and Bea. Worried, Ben approached Bea and suggested they set aside their differences for Claudia and Hallie's wedding. Together, They apologized to the couple and managed to calm things down. The wedding ceremony went ahead without any further problems. At the reception, Ben watched B from afar, unable to ignore his feelings for her. Margaret, seeing an opportunity, invited Ben to dance. She confessed that she had broken up with Beau and still loved Ben. Before Ben could respond, Margaret hugged him. B, standing nearby, witnessed the moment. Her heart shattered and she quietly left the party. Realizing his true feelings for B, Ben pulled away from Margaret and told her that he no longer felt the same. From Claudia and Hallie, Ben learned that B had gone to the Sydney Opera House, a place she had always wanted to visit. Without wasting any time, Ben ran towards the waterfront shouting for help. He called the Coast Guard before jumping into the sea. Within minutes, the Coast Guard arrived and pulled Ben onto their boat. Determined to find B and make things right, Ben set out to resolve everything once and for all. During the helicopter ride, Ben kept insisting that they head straight to the Opera House. He couldn't wait to see B and settle everything. Meanwhile, B stood alone at the Opera House, gazing at the people around her with a slightly lost expression. She tried to calm herself, but her heart still felt heavy. Suddenly, Ben appeared. Soaking wet but full of determination, he jumped out of the helicopter and ran straight toward B. Seeing Ben coming, B's face lit up instantly. A wide smile appeared, and her emotions overflowed. She hadn't expected Ben to show up like this. Ben, still out of breath, began to explain everything. He told her about what had happened with Margaret, and how that moment made him realize that B was the only person he wanted. Touched by Ben's honesty, B stepped closer. Without many words, they shared a warm embrace, finally allowing their long-hidden feelings to surface. After that, they returned to Claudia and Hallie's wedding reception. As soon as they arrived, they were greeted with cheers from friends and family. The atmosphere instantly became lively. The DJ cheerfully played the song B had sung to calm Ben when they were rescued earlier. The song made everyone sing along and dance, teasing Ben in a playful way. The reception turned into a joyful party. Everyone danced, laughed, and enjoyed the happy moment.